So, uh, welcome to my AKB48 and Sister Groups panel. I decided to make this panel because in recent times I've encountered a lot of new fans or people who said that they wanted to get into the franchise on Twitter, but that they felt overwhelmed or didn't know where to start. Because let's face it, it's 15 years of history. It's thousands upon thousands of hours of media. It's hundreds of girls. It can be quite intimidating, but it actually isn't if you know a method to get into the group. And so I decided to make this panel, and here goes. My name is Pav. I have been a fan of AKB48 since 2006. While I'm not the most knowledgeable fan on the planet and I don't know everything, and I've had periods where I was less of a fan, I still feel pretty qualified to do this panel. I go to Japan about once a year, attend AKB48 events. I used to be part of a fan subbing team, fan subbing AKB48 content. So, moving on, what is AKB48? What does it mean? AKB48 is an idol group that was created in 2005 by Akimoto Yasushi, who was the much famed producer of Onyanko Club, which was the first mega idol group in the 80s, and who had other idol ventures in the 90s that were not quite as successful. He wanted to create a group of idols that you can meet. And by that he meant having a lot of members, so that while some members were busy filming television programs or promoting singles and so on, others could do live performances and others could do handshake events. And so the most core important part of that is that the group was to be based at a theater in Akihabara, and where they would hold daily performances, which was the core of the idols you can meet concept. So from the get-go, the group was meant to be divided in three teams, A, K, and B. It took about 2 years for all three teams to be in function, so to speak. Where was I? So with those teams rotating into the theater, each of them performing, let's say 2 days out of the week, maybe. There could be daily performances. A lot more people could get to know the girls. Starting in 2008, they started establishing sister groups to have the same concept in other cities, because you can't meet the idols if you don't live in the city. You can't attend performances easily. So the first one in 2008 was SKE48 in Sakae in Nagoya, and then there was NMB48 for Namba, HKD48 for Hakata, Niigata48, not named after a district, STU for the Seto Inland Sea, and aside from that, starting in 2011, some overseas sister groups were established to export the concept, because by that time it was clear that it was a good concept to make money. AKB48 somewhat quickly gained what you could call an hegemony of Japanese media. They were, from 2010 to 2013 or 14, they were everywhere. They were on every magazine cover and every commercial. They you could not walk around Tokyo without turning your head and seeing an ad with members in it. And one of the things I'm going to address is how they achieved that. Okay, so very quickly, some terms, because there's a lot of slang or technical terms that AKB fans use. What is a senbatsu? Basically, because there's so many members in AKB48, currently over 100 or close to 100, not all of the members are on the A side of a single, or even on the B side. So the A side of a single, what is called senbatsu, means selection. So it's the members that are picked to be part of the A side of the single and get to appear in the music video and on TV performances and so on and so forth. Team, as I've explained before, is how they subdivide each of the sister group for performances at the theater, especially, but occasionally also other concerts or other events. Stage, as I've explained earlier, AKB48 is performing daily, not so much daily anymore, but originally performed daily at their theater. Each of the sister group also has its own theater in its city. So the stages are a predefined set list that were performed at the theater. They were originally what we call original stages is like a set list, a list of songs, almost like an album, and they were structured as an album that was created specifically to be performed at the theater. As time went on and the group grew, there weren't necessarily many new stages made. Teams would revive stages that other teams had done before, that they hadn't been performed in that city or by that group yet. So the stage structure is usually like you'll have a few group songs, an MC with the members, like there are several MC to allow costume changes, and then you'll have unit songs where the teams are usually like 16 to like 22 members. They will be subdivided in like smaller units, so you get, each girl gets more lines and so on and so forth, and then more group songs. Many of those songs, especially unit songs, became very iconic AKB48 songs, not the ones you would hear on the radio or perform on TV, but the ones that that are very popular with fans and get performed at concerts a lot. Generation is basically a batch of new members entering. Members don't enter on an individual basis. There will be like an audition, and a batch of new members will be like taken into the group, and they become kenkyusei, which are trainees. They're girls that have just entered a group that are not part of a team yet, but starting in 2009, if I recall correctly, kenkyusei started having their own stages. That allowed the more popular members of the main teams to perform less often in the theater and to be on TV more often, to film, dramas, movies, and so on. Sosenkyo was the most infamous and important AKB48 and sister groups event. It was a yearly event where you would buy copies of a single to vote for your favorite member, and then the senbatsu for the next single would be composed of those members. And then throw away the CDs. Often, fans would buy hundreds of copies. The amount of money thrown into that election was quite spectacular. There were 10 elections in total. The last one is in 2018. They didn't. There hasn't been new ones. There were reasons for that. I'll get to that later in the panel. But there was a lot of media attention to that event. Big draw for even non-fans would often watch. And the girl, even though the girl that got number one was at the forefront, the center position of the new single, it was also kind of a way to become kind of the face of the group for the coming year. So Janken Taikai was, because in the election only members that were already popular had a better chance of people voting for them. Fans were complaining that girls that were less popular didn't really have a chance to appear on singles, so they did a rock paper scissors yearly tournament that would get to pick the members that were part of the A side. Sadly, after the first year, it was very evident that at least for the first position, the center position of the yearly rock paper scissors single was rigged. It was very evidently rigged. It was always a girl that management wanted to push that would win, even though there were literally like dozens of other girls competing. And then in the last few years, it became non-rigged again, but then it was no longer. It became like a subunit single. It was less of a big thing. Draft is an event that happened 3 times where instead of having management pick a batch of trainees, there would be like a pool of auditionees and team captains and team members would pick draft style new members for their teams, and that was streamed online and so on, so you could watch the members doing that. Request Hour was actually the first big AKB48 event. It started in 2008, and it's the only one that is still being done. It's basically similar to Sosenkyo. By buying a single, you could vote for your favorite song, and then the first year was, I think, 50 or 30, and then like the year where they performed the most songs was 200, so the top 200 songs were performed in order, and then a girl having her, let's say, her solo song come in the higher ranks is like a way for her to get attention and so on. So that is another way for fans to support their favorite members and to get songs that maybe aren't performed as much to be performed. I'm mentioning all of those things because things like Sosenkyo and Janken Taika and the Request Hour are big factors as to why AKB48 was so popular and had so many sales. Of course, the voting tickets and itself generate sales, but aside from that, like the way that you can kind of participate in creating the narrative for the group is a big draw, and that's that. And so Janken Tiger also at like the rock paper scissors tournament had this fun aspect where all of the girls would decide their own costume, and they really made it into a big thing with an announcer and everything. So it's always like waiting to see what member will wear what. So moving on from that, why AKB48, why they're fun to get into, why I encourage people to become fans, is as I just said, all those events, and also there's been all sorts of other events that they've done. SK48, for instance, has done an event where each member got a 10-minute segment that she like could do whatever she wanted with. Some girls sang, some girls played instruments, some girls did skits, some girls read poetry. So that was interesting. NMB48 recently had fans vote for their favorite costumes that the girls have worn. There's all sorts of, they're always coming up with new things. It's very dynamic. It's quite fun. Funny, weird, cute, and sexy. I mean, obviously it's idols. AKB48 became very big through variety TV shows where a lot of rather funny stuff happens, interesting, weird stuff. I did a poll before doing this panel on my Twitter list and asked how people got into the group and got some traction, and the most common answer was through their variety programs. They don't have as many right now for reasons I'll explain later, but their biggest one that lasted for, I think, like 11 years was AK Bingo. A large proportion of the episodes are subbed. You can find them online. It's very funny. They've done Michaike specials that are very funny. I'll get onto that later, but I think the humorous aspect is what draws a lot of people in. The girls are cute. If you're into gravure, if you're into like sexier songs, there's plenty of that. AKB48 has an interesting gap in that, despite them being a cute idol group, they have a lot of darker songs. A lot of their dramas are quite dark, so they're not one-dimensional. And personally, that was one of the things that drew me in. They have a quantity of media that is astounding. Of course, the music, there's like at this point probably around 2,000 songs, all groups together. They had dozens of variety shows. Most of them are over now, but they're still accessible, watchable. They've had several drama series. I'm thinking Magiska Gakuen has something like 7 seasons and spin-offs. They've done several video games. They had dating sims on the PSP and PS Vita. They have a million mobile games. There's an anime, AKB0048. There is a manga. They've done musicals based on the dramas, based on the manga. Like, no matter what you're looking for, there's gonna be something for you. So that's one of the draw. It's also like, it's not like a 13 episode anime series where you're done watching it and then it's like, oh well, there's no more and you're kind of sad. Like, there's endless content. You can watch AKB48 stuff forever. You will never be done. That can be intimidating, but that's also great because there's never that grieving of being done with the franchise. So I'll go over the groups quickly. AKB48 is the original group. They have 5 teams, unlike the other groups. They have AK and B, which were the original 3 teams. They created Team 4 at some point, so they had somewhere to put their members that, had been in the trainees for a while, that they didn't really know what to do with. And Team 8 is a different concept. They have 47 members. They're treated almost as their own sister group rather than an AKB team. Each of the members represents a prefecture in Japan. Their concept originally was, rather than idols you can meet, it was idols that go meet you, and they were touring around Japan. It's been about 6 years, and they're still not done with their original tour of the 47 prefectures. And they now have concurrent positions in the other AKB teams, so it's unclear what's going to happen with that. It's not entirely impossible. They will get disbanded and morphed into the other team, but not necessarily. AKB has the peculiarity that all of its A-sides since maybe 2008, have members from the other sister groups show up in it. In a way, like AKB48 single sales, like you get a handshake ticket, and that includes you can pick a handshake ticket for members of the sister group, so they kind of benefit from the popularity of the sister groups as well. But the drawback from that is that there's less room in the singles. There's less room in the A-sides and music videos for members of AKB itself. SK48 was the first sister group. They are very popular. In the last election, they had the most girls ranking, and also it was girls from that group that had rank 1 and 2. They were originally at least known for their good dancing, their very high energy. They had, at least for a good while, the highest age average, and they're very funny. They have some very great variety shows, like every Friday night. It's hilarious. It's one series I recommend for people looking to get into the group. And MB48, based in Namba, they originally had the sexier image, kind of associated with the more passionate side of Osaka. They did a lot of comedy. They are on all the other sister groups were originally managed and owned by the same company, AKS. However, NMB is owned and operated by Yoshimoto, which is a big comedy agency in Japan, like the biggest. So they're a franchisee, and now all of the sister groups are, but originally only NMB48 was. So they do a lot of traditional Japanese comedy. They had a whole TV series based around that. Their songs are, all of the groups do different kind of songs, but they had the funkier sound originally. HKD48 were for a lot of the time the cute younger group. Of course, with time, the members age, other groups get younger members, but that was originally their image. So not much to say about HKD48. They're very successful, quite popular. And GT48, there was the first group that was not named after a district, it's just named after the city of Niigata. They were extremely successful, from the get-go. Their theme songs were winning Request Hour. Their girls were doing, super well in the elections. I'm gonna get to that later, but NGT48 had a huge scandal in early 2019, one that managed to drag almost all of the franchise under with them. I'm barely exaggerating here. It was very damaging, and it became kind of clear that their high success was at least partly due to some corrupt reasons. I will get to that later. I have a whole section about their scandal and its effect. SU48 is the first group that was not based on a city. Rather, it is based on a region, the Seto Inland Sea. So STU is for Setouchi. And their theater is on a ship that goes from city to city around like a few cities around the sea, like Hiroshima and so on. It took them a while to get their ship. Like, they were announced as this like cruise ship idol group and whatever, and then it took several years for the ship to be built and like the theater to be operational. So that put kind of a damper on their activities. They definitely have Lightning Ghetto 48, they have an image that was a bit more refined than the original AKB groups. Like, they, more modest outfits. You can see them, they're on screen right now. Slightly more modest outfits, less flashy, a pure, mature image. Unlike every other group, these two groups do not have teams. NGT48 originally had teams. Following the scandals, their teams were disbanded and the group was just re-merged as both teams, all the members together. SU48 never had teams. They tried a different approach. They somehow recently divided the group in units that have themes. Like, one of them is like the performance unit. The other one is like based on a specific region of the area that they operate in, so on and so forth. It's unclear how that's going to play out in the future. They're the most recent group in the franchise. But they're clearly trying a different approach. So that's about it. They're a little bit special. People were asking me, are you going to talk about the Sakamichi series? Also the 46 groups. Are they, or people that don't know, are they related? It's 48, 46. They are related. They have the same creator. Akimoto Yasushi created AKB48 and its sister groups. Also created and produces Nogizaka 46, Yakisaka 46, and Hinata Sakura 46. And they were created originally as like a rival group to the 48 franchise. But in terms of rivalry, they did end up being a rival group because they ended up like outselling AKB48 eventually, but their concepts kind of move away from each other. Like, they also had a theater at first, but they didn't perform the same way. They don't have teams, but there is some overlap. They have done songs together. So there's a few AKB48 singles that have B-sides that are labeled Sakamichi AKB with members of both franchises. And at some point, some SK48 member was a part of Nogizaka, and so on and so forth. And at first, there was really no overlap between the fandoms. Nogizaka fans were people that had never gotten into AKB48, but as time went on, a lot of AKB48 fans kind of moved onto the Sakamichi series. In a way, and this is conjecture and not necessarily something we know for sure, it kind of appears that their producer also kind of did the thing. His focus shifted, and to an extent, we could say that the 48 series suffered a little bit from it. But the Sakamichi series is thriving. That's not the only factor, but definitely it's not just some of the fans that moved on. Definitely some of the production staff are more focused on Sakamichi. So as I mentioned, there's overseas sister groups. The second of which was SNH48, based in Shanghai, China. However, they're not related anymore because in 2016 they kind of went rogue and did a bunch of stuff they weren't supposed to do, like start a whole bunch of other sister groups without getting approval from Tokyo for it. And then they were kind of like cut loose. Last Idol is another project by Kimoto Yasushi, that televised TV show with idols. Equal Love and Not Equal Me. Sashihara Nino is a very famous former member of HKT48 who produces this group. The Coin Lockers, Kimoto Yasushi again, idol rock band project with, once again, 1 million members, because that's what he's about, apparently. And there's a whole lot of things that are groups, acts that are related, because a lot of members, ex-members, went on to having music careers, or creating new groups, or producing new groups, or so on and so forth. So even once you're done getting into AKB48 and sister groups, there's still more out there because it literally never ends. So I was saying earlier that AKB48 has a lot of variety shows. I could not count them all. Currently, AKB48 itself has 2 ongoing shows, which are Nemo Suterebi and a show of which the name escapes me, but it's some educational show. They used to have literally dozens going on at once. There's more comedy-oriented shows. There's more like project shows where it's like, oh, well, this girl's gonna learn this new skill or something. When I did my poll about how people got into the franchise, a lot of people came from Produce 48. Produce 48 was part of the Produce series of show in Korea that aimed to create a temporary K-pop idol group. They did a collaboration with the AKB48 franchise, where, half the trainees on the show were from AKB48 and sister groups, and the other half were Korean trainees. And this show was hugely popular. A lot of people came in recently into the fandom from the K-pop fandom through that show. So if you're into K-pop and you haven't watched it or whatever, I suggest it's apparently a very good gateway. I can't say for sure myself because I'd already been a fan a long time when I watched it, but I do think it's one way to get into them. They have a lot of interesting dramas. I didn't list all of them here. The Magiska Gakuen series is a series about girls fighting in schools. There's about, like, with the spin-offs, I think about, like, 6-7 seasons, movies, so on. There was Crow's Blood, which is an horror drama they did. They did a wrestling series with full-on, like, wrestling personas and so on, and also had, like, 2 live events to follow that. So if you like wrestling and you like idols, you might want to watch that. They really went all out, and there's many more. Games, as I said, they did a few dating sim kind of games. They have rhythm games on mobile. They have other weird dice card games, all sorts of. There's like about, I think, like 8 mobile games that are like functional right now. There is a manga series that's called AKB1 on 49. If I recall correctly, I had a few people telling me they got into the fandom that way. There were not a whole lot of musicals, albeit like members do take part in musicals for other franchises, like they get to do outside jobs like that, but there was a Magiska Gakuen musical, there was a musical based on the manga as well, and they had like at least 1 or 2 others, if you're into musicals that way. There have been about like 8, I think, documentaries about like AKB48 proper, then some about the sister groups too, and there's been a bunch about like individual members. I know that a lot of people I talked to told me that they didn't really have respect for the group, and then they watched one of the documentaries and it changed that. I think that the documentary series is very well made. It's worth watching. And of course, I mean, they're an idol group, so the main thing is music and concert. And as I said, there's like thousands of songs at this point. There is the stages, there is the singles, and with A sides and B sides, there's the albums. They've done songs for commercials and so on. They do the theater stages. They also do like tours and concerts and bigger venues because the theaters are very small. They're like a few hundred seats. It's a very intimate experience, which is part of the whole Idols You Can Meet concept. So, I mean, I've posted earlier in the chat, the text channel, a list of resources. I will add to it, but if you're looking for any of those things, it will be in some of the resources in there. So if you want to start with one of the dramas, or if you'd like to look at some concerts, I've got links, and you can go for that. So how to get into the group? As I said, it's huge, it's intimidating. There is like literally thousands of hours of media. There's different methods that I've used to get people to get to know the group. The chronological method it's personally my favorite, but it's also kind of like the hardest. Is to just watch everything they've ever released in chronological order, be it like variety shows, TV series, or whatever. Then you know everything. You will have the full knowledge, the full experience. However, it's a very daunting task because, as I said, it's just humongous, and you will absolutely like fall in love with some members that like graduated like 7 years ago, and some of the stuff from early AKB, like comedy stuff, did not age super well. Inappropriate stuff with younger girls is one thing. There's been a few blackface comedy skits. It like not all of it is great, but so if you can get past that, it's still my favorite method, but it's not necessarily like the one most people will go for. The one girl method is basically just watch a few recent episodes of something, or a concert, or a live performance, or even just look at pictures. Pick a girl that, you know, catches your eye. She might not end up being your favorite member, but like it's a start. And then you look up what shows she's been on, what performances she's done, and so on, and you start from there. And you'll pick up, like through osmosis, the names of her teammates, and so on and so forth. And but if you do that and you pick a recent member, there's a lot of stuff about the history that fans will talk about that will confuse you because you won't have necessarily like context for it. You can, of course, mix and match those methods. You can decide to pick just one show, like, oh, I'll watch all of AK Mango and nothing else, or I'll just watch like all of the Team A theater performances, or you can just pick one thing and do that chronologically, or you can, you know, mix and match. Or you can also just start now and look at, you know, what's the next like subbed episode of something that comes out, and just watch that and go from there. What's the next performance, and just watch it and kind of, you know, forget about the past and just try to keep up with what's current. You'll be very confused at first probably, and you will not know the history. So those are different ways to get into the group. I think that, you know, probably like picking one girl or one group or one team or one show and starting with that is probably the best way. I personally have my favorite things about AKB48. I'm a big fan of Magiska Gakuen. I'm a big fan of certain teams, certain girls, but to each their own. It's about finding like the one thing that will draw you in. So I made a brief history recap. I'll try to go over it fast because I'm already more than halfway through and I still have a lot of stuff to talk about. But basically, AKB48 is created in 2005. They announced the members, and a few months later, the Team A is created, and they perform at the theater. 2006, you know, a second team. They have their first indie single. They have 2 indie singles before they go major. And their first concert. Still pretty light. Then the third team, so they're finally like, you know, the full AKB trifecta. And they announce trainees because, you know, they get into a point where, well, what if a girl is sick? What if a girl is on TV? What if a girl, and then she can't perform at the theater? Who do we have to fill in for her? So they need trainees, and they know that some girls will leave eventually. It already started happening. So they get new girls, but they don't put them directly in the teams. They keep them as trainees, as under girls. And 2008, you see the start of the big events with the first Request Hour, the first sister group. And 2009 is when really their success started. So they've already been around at that point for a solid a bit over 3 years. That's the first year where you get an AKB48 single that sells like 100,000 copies. That's when they had the first election, their first daily and weekly number one on the Oricon chart. That's also a point in time where they created another sister group that I didn't mention earlier because it does not exist anymore, but SDN48. For Saturday Night 48, they were a more mature, more adult sister group. They shifted some of the older girls from AKB48 into it and had also all new members. The performances were 18 plus only at first. They had racier songs with more sexual themes and so on and so forth. And the 2009 shuffle, where they basically took the girls from the 3 teams and switched them teams. In 2010, it kind of confirms their success. They're not just a one-hit wonder. They get their first monthly number one, and they get their first million seller, which in 2010 was a rare feat. And they create another sister group, and they got their first yearly number one, which was also like their first million seller. And that's when they do the first rock paper scissors tournament, which attracted some positive media attention. 2011 is kind of like more of the same, more new sister groups. That's when the rival group Nokizaka 46 was created. That's when they did Team 4 because they had a bunch of trainees that had been around for a while that were gaining popularity, but there weren't enough members leaving since they were so successful to kind of give them a chance to shine. So they make a new team for them. They have their first overseas group in Jakarta, Indonesia. And then 2012, their dream from the beginning was to have a concert at Tokyo Dome. And that's the year they achieved that. And so their first Tokyo Dome concert, another team shuffle, they disband Team 4 for whatever reason. I don't think any of the fans really ever understood why. Create another overseas group. That's when they disband SDN48. I think it wasn't seeing quite the success they were hoping. They had done they were trying to venture into K-pop, with the style of music, and they had some Korean in the lyrics, and I think they were kind of aiming to break into that market, and since that didn't work, they just kind of dropped the group altogether. So that's kind of, people consider that from 2010 to maybe 2013 is really the peak of AKB before they started declining. So 2013 is much of the same. I mentioned the concert at Nissan Stadium because Nissan Stadium is the largest venue in Japan with 78,000 seats. So that was their biggest concert ever. They also had a dome tour where they once again performed at Tokyo Dome, but also at Nagoya Dome, Fukuoka Dome, Sapporo Dome, and I'm missing one, but anyway, and they recreated Team 4 again, and that's when they had the first draft. 2014, they shuffled the teams again, but that time they shuffled the teams of the sister groups too, and they shift some girls from sister group to sister group. That's when they had conquered positions with Nokizaka 46. That was a confusing time for fans. There was just so much happening at the same time. They create Team 8, they just add 47 girls at once. But that's kind of the end of the peak. It's hard to tell if it was just people moving on after too much of the same, or if all those moves, all the team shuffles, too many groups at once, it making it, as you guys are saying, very intimidating. All those new girls maybe kind of drove people away. It became too big, and their resources became stretched thin, and that will become evident. They create another sister groups. They shuffle the teams again. They're clearly trying to find their place. They keep shuffling the teams. Not much really happened. That's when SNH48 goes rogue. So The members that had concurrent positions in SNH48 kind of as mentor figures are shipped back to Japan. Yet in 2017, yet another sister group, another shuffle. At this point, it's a lot of like more of the same. There weren't many new breakthroughs. Maybe that's why a lot of people got bored. And finally in 2018, a bit more stuff happened. They do another venture in China since SNH48 went rogue. They create AKB48 Team SH for Shanghai. So that creates this weird situation. We're in the same city. You have like two groups with the same concept and the same origin, but that are not the same franchise. Also group in Taipei. And that was the last election. And at that point in time, SKE48, which was in a way like the biggest of the sister groups, is sold by AKS to Keyholder, and which made it like a publicly traded company under the name SKE48 Hank. And what that means, well, why they did that is, as I said before, with all the sister groups and the overseas sister groups, their resources were getting kind of stretched in. AKB48 went from releasing like 5 singles a year to, 4, and then suddenly it was less, and they went from having like a dome concert every summer to just like doing smaller venues. You could see, just to answer a question in the chat, I do have theories as to why no Senbatsu elections, and we will get to that very quickly, because it's more than a theory. It's pretty certain. But one of those factors is that SKE48 was acquired by Keyholder, so like big events that involve all of the groups, now that they're not owned by the same owner. That was always the case for NMB48, but it was like that from the get-go, whereas like SKE48 being acquired, it creates all sorts of, if they want to work together, put on an event together, be it Sosankyo, be it a concert, they have to, sign contracts, and there is all that extra complication that wasn't there initially when it was all under the same company. So yeah, the resources were stretched in. By letting go of SKE48, they could make a good chunk of money, but they had a deal where the producer of AKB48, if the Keyholder, the shares of the SKE48 Inc. Dropped too low in price, he would make up for the difference. So they tried to avoid that happening. It still happened for reasons I'm about to come to, and also because of the pandemic that we're going through right now. So the last of history, 2019 and the NGT48 scandal, because that is pretty much the only thing that happened in 2019, and that was important, and also it spells where the history of the group is going. What the NGT48 scandal was, a scandal in which a member got assaulted in her dorm room by people that had been brought in by, of course there's different versions of stories, but I'm gonna go with her version of the facts and what's kind of agreed on in the fandom. So basically many of her fellow members were not respecting the no dating rule and had men over at the dorms. Basically they were dating fans, and one of them wanted to get with her, so basically he was let in and led into her room by fellow members and their boyfriends. There is more to it. It goes a lot deeper, because as it came out, those fans were, had ties to organized crime, had ties to the media. The girls that did that to her, that had ties to, like, their families had ties to government organizations that financed NGT48. It became a very big deal that attracted a huge amount of media attention, not only in Japan, but internationally as well. It made the 48 franchise look extremely bad for good reasons. These are young girls that are entrusted to, this agency, and they failed to protect her. They were obviously letting girls have fans over, which had for consequence that a member got assaulted. And they, instead of, apologizing or whatever, they had her apologize for creating a commotion. They denied all of the events, true and true. They never admitted that anything had happened. They denied involvement of other members, even though it was quite clear from what fans were able to dig up that they were involved, and she was saying the truth. So that looked very bad. They lost a lot of sponsorships, both NGT48 directly, but also the franchise as a whole. And that is the main reason why we didn't get an election in 2019, and why we likely wouldn't have gotten one this year as well, is because they haven't recovered from that, and at that point in time they were very far from it. And they didn't even release singles for a while after that. They weren't doing much at all. They were being very quiet. They were not going to do a large scale thing like that, especially one where, what fans would have voted for those members that, bullied their fellow member into. She left the group eventually. She graduated along with another member. And then those girls that did that were in some cases popular members, and if they had an election, those girls could have ranked high. The kind of media attention that would have brought back after all of that was not good. It also affected clearly their success. They lost a lot of, they weren't able to renew their contracts for a lot of TV shows and so on and so forth. That's why, they used to have 1 million variety shows. AK Bingo, which lasted for 11 years, ended very likely because of that, as well as AKB Show that had lasted for a good, I think 6 years. Basically, that scandal caused them, I don't want to say almost everything, but caused them a lot of their media presence, a lot of the respect they had, and instead of being a household name, they became kind of a franchise you don't really want to work with. And that's when HKT48 and GT48 were sold to Sprout by Mercury and Flora. Basically, HKT48 was acquired by Mercury, and GT48 was acquired by Flora, both of which are subsidiaries of Sprout, which is one and the same, which is they both belong to the same company. That was, this effort to divest and separate each group was kind of probably an effort to save the brand. If we just separate all groups, then we can be we're not responsible for the weight, by kind of separating each of the sister groups into their own entity, legally speaking, but also morally speaking. It allowed AKS to just, that basically if one of the groups sinks, it doesn't take everyone down with them. That was kind of late, given that the effect that the NGT48 scandal had. But so yeah, those are the two main factors as to why we didn't get elections. Is it wouldn't have looked good, the optics were not good, and also because since now all of the groups belong to different companies, doing that sort of collaborative event is a bit more complicated. 2020, I'm saying nothing because, well, of course, with the pandemic, a lot of the stuff that had been planned is not happening anymore, but there's still stuff happening. There's whole concerts or whatever that happened before the pandemic hit. They're still doing streams, all sorts of stuff, but nothing noteworthy. And I'm just gonna basically one thing I didn't super mention is graduation. Graduation is when a girl leaves the group. There's other ways to leave the group, like some girls will withdraw or be kicked out, usually because of scandals or health issues or things like that. But a proper graduation is when a girl, like, forewarns the fans, like, okay, I want to leave the group, and then, like, in a matter of, like, weeks, months, the longest was 1 year, she will leave. And the reasons for leaving the group vary a lot. Some of them just I've been in the group for a while, want to move on. Some of them find out what they really want to do. Some of them want to go back to private life. Some of them realize that being in the entertainment industry is not for them. The ones that do stay in the entertainment industry have done a wide variety of things. Most of them will do several stuff, but they'll be variety talents on TV. A lot of them play in stage plays. That is like probably the most common outcome, I'd say. The most successful ones manage to become drama or movie actresses, usually like frontline members that had a decent like acting career while in the group. Some of them had solo singing career or created or joined other groups. Many just retire from public life, marry, have kids, whatever. Some go into gravure specifically. Like a lot of them will do some of it on the side, but some of them have like went full on like like bikini modeling, DVDs and so on. A few when they see you out. A lot of them being the ones that were cast in the AKB48 anime. And a handful of members have gone into porn, which is something that, some people felt was quite scandalous. Okay, so speaking of scandals, I just went over the NGT48 scandal and its impact. In the resource list that I posted, I will add more about that because it's really an overview that I did, but it goes a lot deeper in the implications about the ties to organized crime and things like that. But in general, like there is a love ban rule. While it's understood that they're not necessarily like obliged to not date, it's pretty clear that if they get caught, there's consequences. The consequences tend to vary a lot. It's unclear why they vary. Some girls are left alone. Some girls are kicked out of the group. There was the infamous incident where Minagishi Minami shaved her head in repentance and was demoted to a trainee status after she was a first generation member. Just to be clear, she was probably mostly demoted for shaving her head and making a huge deal, more than for the dating thing, because they never did anything quite as drastic for anyone else. As I said, former members becoming AV stars, like now it's become a bit more normalized, but like the first time it happened, people felt it was quite scandalous, especially since the member who did that said that, she had been like led to sleep with producers when she was like in the group. Unclear if it's true or not. Unclear if she means like by KS, by her own agency or whatever. It's not the only claim of the type that has come up. Attacks on members in 2015, I believe, to a guy at a handshake event. A guy came with a saw and attacked two of the members and some staff members that were trying to protect them. He was arrested. He said that he wasn't like a crazy fan or anything. He just thought that was a place that was going to be crowded where he could hurt people. But it definitely led to a tightening on security, and it's kind of like appalling that there wasn't better security before that, and that that this could have happened in the first place. But like the members were mostly okay, like they were slightly injured, but one of them ended up leaving the group as a consequence of the trauma that she felt after, like the trauma that she felt after being attacked with a saw, which is fair. Other scandals have been like, like some of the members, like private social media accounts were discovered where they would, be bitching about other members, or would be, yes, a saw, like an actual saw. That it's probably not even the craziest thing that happened in the group, but like person uses handshake attack to commit saw crime is a thing that happened. So yeah, and like connected to the SNS thing, that reveals some amount of like bullying between members, which, to be fair, if you got hundreds of teenage and young women together, is kind of sadly bound to happen. But the NGT48 scandal was clearly a case of that went like way too far. Bullying is never okay or whatever, but it led to like someone being assaulted, and yeah. So that's not all of them. It's a brief overview. There's been like so many scandals. There's been like, other stuff like, oh, mom of said member is involved with organized crime, or all sorts of smaller scandals. But the impact, like, there's always an impact on scandals. It makes a company look bad. It's not always like the fault of the girls or even of the management, but it in the case of the NGT scandal, the consequence was kind of well deserved, because they failed to protect their member and they chose to protect the bullies and the perpetrators of the crime instead, because, well, partly of the connection of the families of the involved members, and because of the connections of the perpetrators, the assaulters. So obviously that's just not good. It wasn't good optics. They did not handle it well. They fired a theater manager over it, but they never came out and said clearly what happened, when clearly everybody knew what had happened. They really didn't take responsibility. There's reasons for that, like financially and so on, and because of like the connection some of those members had, but it's inexcusable, and it's a stain that will like stay with the group forever at this point. So yeah, I'm gonna look at how much time I've got left. I got 3 minutes left. So very quickly, thank you. The client explained, I've been over a lot of this, but why is AKB48 less popular than it used to? It's just, popularity fades with time. You can't stay on top of the world forever. That's just a thing. They had a clear center for most of the groups at first. Achan for AKB48, Janina for SK48, so on and so forth. And once that member graduated, in the case of Achan, it's kind of like they couldn't decide if they wanted like to find a replacement for her and have a new face of the group, or they were like, oh, we can't put all of our eggs in the same basket like that again, so let's just rotate centers. And they keep like kind of going back and forth between those two strategies, and it's just very confusing for fans, and it's not clear like what they're going for. As I said, the producer is quite focused on the Sakamichi series. There clearly is favorite project at this time. So the resources were stretched in by too many groups. That is gonna get better with the separated, the different sister groups being owned by different companies now. So hopefully, AKB48 will be more AKB48 focused. We might see more releases. The effect is already felt in groups like HKD48 and SKE48. They're getting more TV shows, more opportunities in general, especially local jobs to their areas, than they were in the last few years before. So it seems to be working. Remains to be seen, but hopefully the same happens to AKB48 proper. It remains to be seen. They played it kind of safe for a while. They did the same events, oh, we'll do handshake events so we sell more CDs, or we'll do the election once a year, they would do very formulaic, we'll have a cute graduation cherry blossom song in the spring, then a fun summer single, then we'll do a cooler, darker release in the fall, and they had that kind of pattern every year. So that's one way that people kind of got bored. They weren't trying anything new, but then again, when they did, they would get criticized for it. So yeah, that is it. I finished this panel with just a few slides about why I love AKB48 so much. They have very beautiful music videos, also extends to concert, beautiful concept costumes, a lot of budget, especially in the peak years. Their music videos, even for B-sides, are just really, really, really fun to look at visually. So there's that. I like AKB48 because AKB48 gets dark. I've said this before, but the gap between like the concept of the cute idol, I should have GIFs that are moving in here and they're not. I don't understand why. Oh, because my computer froze. And as I didn't say, but AKB48 has a lot of girl-on-girl action, which I personally find quite great. So I'll leave you guys on that, but if you're ever also a fan of girls making out with girls on stage, AKB48 might be the franchise for you. So thank you all for coming to my panel, and if you have any questions, feel free to come to me in the chat or on Twitter, and I'll be happy to answer all your questions on where to find stuff, how to get in the group. There's plenty of very nice fans also that I can point you to for, you know, sister groups that I know less about. And so I will also, like, as I said, I posted resources on the chat. I will link them again. I will link this PowerPoint as well if you'd like to look at it again. Thank you for coming to my panel. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to chat in the chat channel, the text channel.